Coming up in what will be a critical offseason for the Brooklyn Nets, we break down why they should choose to trade Seth Curry over Joe Harris right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is owner-operator Doug Norrie of DFSR. For all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings and FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants over on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, fresh off a great conversation with one of the preeminent voices around the Brooklyn Nets. I'll let you kind of throw the flowers at his feet. This is, I think I'm finally out of the blues, man. I think I'm finally into now Nets kind of off-season conversations where I don't have to remain depressed seeing some NBA playoff basketball.
Yeah, it made it easy. Chris Mulholland, obviously, over the last couple of days was on the pod. He's the best, writes for Nets Daily. Really appreciate him coming on. He's always just like a wealth of information, so that's really great. Got us thinking about a bunch of different stuff, which we're going to try to flesh out over the next few episodes. I will say one funny thing about that is that Adam and I did not talk about this part. Is Chris and I actually had an off-air conversation about just, what it's like to talk about a team when they're no longer in the playoffs and you're kind of away from the draft and it's sort of a downtime of the year. And I think we both had come to this place of like ready to talk about the offseason more. But it was funny about how if you were in this space and you do this stuff every single day, which we love doing, you can kind of find like brothers and sisters in arms in and how they react
Right.
to the same thing. Because Chris and I were basically saying the exact same thing to each other off air about just what it means and how what it means to talk about like overnight to shift the way you talk about a team. I guess that's more what it is. It's overnight you're shifting the way you talk and think about a team. You go from playoffs, what do they got to do to win the series? What do they got to do to win the championship? To all right, on to next year. And you literally do it overnight. I think you and I kind of came to peace with it after game 3. But it is funny that when you go throughout the space, I think fans do the same thing. It's how can you not? You have to shift your brain. Otherwise, because that's the other thing that you thought was going to happen is no longer going to happen.
Yeah, and by the way, you go from saying like, oh, if player X, if Seth Curry can do X, Y, Z, he can really help them beat Boston, to the conversation we're getting into. Should the Brooklyn Nets trade Seth Curry as opposed to Joe Harris? And there's a real one-to-one comparison around what the skill sets of these players are, what they bring to this roster in support of Kevin Durant, and we presume a big contract, Kyrie Irving, and then Ben Simmons coming back here. So we're going to talk about them from basically every level. There's the player themselves and what they bring to the table. There's also the finances that are involved in that, and then what the impact could be for other decisions around this roster, and what it could look like on the free agent market, replacing some of these commodities as well. I will, just before we dive totally into this, I do, off of that conversation of pivoting away from NBA playoffs, I said this the other day about, hey, how do Nets fans feel out of game 1 watching Boston against Philadelphia? And then you flip it over and you go, against the Bucks. Then you flip it over and you go, well, now game 2 and seeing some of this action. But Philly popped up in my mind because you're seeing the guys that were on the Brooklyn Nets in so many forms and fashions over the last couple of years out there, as you joked before we got on. Oh, it's playoff DeAndre Jordan, as we all anticipated it would be.
Playoff starter DeAndre Jordan.
It's just absolutely insane to
Paul
be
Millsap
here.
getting minutes, yeah. Harden looking like a total corpse. I will say this. We're getting far afield here, but the Philadelphia thing is a cautionary tale in believing about what players can still do, and then watching it sort of at the highest level, because it's hard to feel like you totally lost the trade right now. But even though and this is just speaking about Harden, even with Simmons not playing at all, looking at Harden and watching him go about his business at this point, and then obviously with the DeAndre thing, which is it's second only to Andre Drummond starting for multiple games in like the old like what's happening here. Anyway, so yeah, just funny, like Nets slightly west and south in Philly right now, which is what that team is not looking like they're going to be able to make it out of this round.
So as we say, there's a lot to digest here. And some of the big decisions around Brooklyn, we know about Bruce Brown. We know about Nicholas Claxton. We understand we had that big episode, multiple episodes talking about Kyrie Irving's situation on the player option and the max extension that, of course, Brooklyn is more than likely going to do. We even talked about Joe Tsai and how he feels about it all. But when you compare some of the big moves here, Joe Harris, obviously, ironically almost, off that ankle injury and surgery. Seth Curry dealing with ankle issues down the stretch of the season into the it felt like when that trade was made with Philadelphia, you brought in this for like replacement that you needed, who can knock down the perimeter shot. Now, these players are not identical in terms of skill set and role, but where they are identical is the production that they bring to the table. There is something just hilarious when we'll get into the money piece in a second here. When you compare these two players for their NBA regular season career, they are a little north of 11 points per game. Joe Harris has a slight rebounding edge, slight assist edge to Seth Curry, but they basically knock down for their careers, by the way. For their careers, their three-point percentage, 43.9%. I only have to say it once because they both hit the same exact percentage. Do you look at these guys, because that's just the number standpoint, but then you talk about the functionality, but just from the pure shooting perspective, this is 1-to-1, apples to apples. Do you want the slightly taller three-point shooter or the slightly more mobile three-point shooter?
Yeah, look, at this point, they're both basically among the very most elite shooters in the game. 62% true shooting for Harris for his career, 61% true shooting for Curry for his career. You mentioned the size, which we'll get into a little bit. But yeah, no, in terms of shooters, like this is so funny about talking about trading these guys because, and which one has more value? They're both extremely, I think, still valuable. And in a lot of ways, they're the exact thing every team needs, right? You just need these guys. You want in a game that lives and dies by the 3-pointer at this point, for the most part, or just at least like 3-pointer at the rim. What you want the most are guys who can shoot lights out that you can space around the court. And so thinking about even trading them kind of feels a little like folly because this is sometimes the exact kind of guy that you want to get in here. On the other hand, you have two of the most elite scorers in the game already on your team, and you might need to figure out the best way to create the most value around those guys. So we're in a very tricky spot with these guys, I think. And I think I'm going to probably come down somewhere in the middle, which we'll get to. But it's funny because at the same time, I totally understand the reasoning behind wanting to ship them off for a sort of different part, maybe a part that they're not going to have. And by the way, they're going to have a lot of holes here. This is a roster that could very well have like severe deficiencies. But at the same time, you're like, well, I always want to get back shooting also. And these are the two of the best shooters in the game. So this is where I think threading the needle on this is going to be a little tricky.
And you mentioned the piece around holes on the roster. Like that's the facilitation as we get in towards the money piece of this as well. We know the Brooklyn Nets are going to be in a similar waters here once they re-up Kyrie Irving and then also add in other pieces, decisions that they're going to make around other players on this roster. But just focus just for a second on the court piece of it. As the roster is currently constructed, do you just objectively take everything else away from it? Because then we'll talk money and functionality. But do you prefer to have the taller Joe Harris, who, as we said before, he's not an on-the-ball guy. He's not going to take guys off the dribble. He's not a score at every level player, although he showcases a little bit of it. Or do you prefer the closer to guard than forward product that is Seth Curry, who can do a little bit more on his own and certainly can also facilitate a little bit better, right? That's the divergent of these two skill sets is the size and a couple more rebounds versus a couple more assists. Do you have a preference that goes hand in hand with elite three-point shooting?
I think I'd always, all things being equal, would take the size in this case because I think the size translates just a little bit better to playoff basketball. And based on, like, for instance, Curry's skill set looked super great this season when the team was just at times missing guys that they really needed. They were missing guard play, right? They were missing Kyrie at times. And they didn't have, until Dragic kind of came on, they didn't have a ton of secondary ball handlers. Theoretically, they shouldn't need as many of those guys if all these other guys play. If Kyrie and KD are on the court, if Simmons is on the court too, right? Who can handle the ball. He has other problems, but that's not one of them. So I think at that point, I would just take the size because we saw that while Harris is not an elite defender by any stretch of the imagination, at some point you just need to, and we said this with Chris, you just need to be bigger. Your size will become a detriment. This is why basketball players need to be kind of a certain size when they enter the league. And you can get really, really skilled and be smaller, but it's going to be harder, right? It's going to be because there's a lot more small people in the world that aren't basketball players or NBA basketball players. That's just a simple sort of math is solved. At some point, you just need to be a certain size, unless you're totally elite at something else. And that just becomes harder because there's a lot of guys that can do that stuff. So at that point, size is the one thing you can't, like, quote, get better at. You can't get better at your size. You can't increase you can get better at shooting. You can get better at dribbling. You can get better at all this other stuff. You can get better at defensive stuff. At some point, you just can't get better at size. You just are the size you are. And so at that point, I think I would default to Harris with the understanding that he has massive red flags around him because we just don't know what the ankle is going to be. So, and I guess you were saying just wipe away the other stuff. I think I would rather have Harris. I have a feeling that will be the minority opinion when I read the YouTube comments tomorrow.
Well, by the way, we could be on the same page here because we're going to continue to flesh out what the skill set, the size, how that impacts relative to this roster and to Kevin Durant and to Kyrie Irving, right? Because that's the non-vacuum piece, is who else is on this roster. But coming up here in a second, in spite of the fact of Joe Harris representing more than twice the salary cap hit on the books coming into this season, it should still be Seth Curry that is the trade piece they dangle out there on the market. Before we do, though, got to remind you, friends, that our friends over at Built Bar are here for you because summer is coming. And with summer, you're going to need some food on the go. You're also going to try to avoid eating some nasty products that don't necessarily make you look so slim in those Speedos. That's why Built Bar has you covered, because they're the perfect snack to take with you, whether it's running around to the gym, hitting the beach, or going on your family vacations. You throw them in your bag, you throw them in your kid's backpack. Let them have some quality product on the go as well. The best part about Built Bars, as we know, they're both healthy and delicious, covered in 100% real chocolate, whether it's the bars or the one-of-a-kind, first-of-their-kind, unique protein-infused marshmallow puffs. You get over on those stats, as we always like to tell you, just 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, just 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. You know what you're not doing is giving your kids a candy bar with 240 calories and 30 grams of sugar. I don't think so, friends. Go to Built.com right now and get all your favorites, from banana cream pie, raspberry. I know my boy Doug keeps it simple with double chocolate, and so many more. They're delicious, and new flavors are coming all the time. And of course, when you go to Built.com right now, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off on your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. So as we say here, when we move into then the what the money means when we talk about these two players, and we can extend it beyond it there, just to round out that piece that you were mentioning. I agree with you that Joe Harris should be the guy you keep, and Seth Curry could be the guy that you should be moving. Because when you think about, we can just take this Boston Celtics series, right? Kevin Durant can shoot over anybody, but it's not like he's a powerhouse. He's not built like Giannis, right? So the physicality as this roster is currently constructed, then you go inside. Kyrie Irving is an elite talent. He's also not the biggest guy in the world, right? They don't have a lot of size to begin with. So whatever you're going to look to accomplish on the free agent market, it's going to be hard to say, let's take away size and then look to bring it back plus more, which is what we need to do. Beyond that, though, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, you can go ahead. I was going to make a comment about that, but I think you're just going to move into it now.
Because, well, so beyond that, then the other piece is going to be the money that these two players represent.
Yeah.
So as I said, $18 million on the books for Joe Harris coming into this offseason or going to next year, a little north of $8 million for Seth Curry. The big factor here is, one, the guys are both the same age, by the way. Talk about things that are similar, right around the same age. So you're talking about guys just north of 30, 31. But Joe Harris is coming off of an injury, so you need to get him back on the floor, need to show that he's healthy. He also is over twice the salary when you're talking about trying to make him an attractive option for another team. In some regards, and we talked about this before, it could have been a salary dump scenario that you're trying to do. Whereas Seth Curry, coming off a career best year in 2022, especially with his time with the Brooklyn Nets, he's a very attractive piece at $8 million for a lot of teams. Like, you can actually accomplish a lot by dangling him out there to get the money off the books, maybe get an actually usable asset in the draft, or look to maybe work a player swap that gets you more size, gets you some 3-and-D wing defense potentially. That's the biggest motivator around this move too, is I don't know how attractive Joe Harris is right now between the injury and coupled with the money.
Yeah, your best chance at upgrading the roster at this point, or upgrading the future, which is going to be interesting to see where the Nets think they are in this trajectory based on, and I think this offseason is going to tell us a lot about where they see themselves, because, you have Kevin Durant on the books. You don't want to think about reloading here because you'd only get so many years. At the same point, they might say to themselves, hey, we have a lot of deficiencies still, and we need to do like a soft reset here, like a 1-year reset to see what we have with Simmons or whatever. I think this offseason will tell the story in a big way of where they kind of envision themselves. I think the Curry piece actually will be a big part of it, because if it's a draft day deal, like Chris Mulholland mentioned, and they wanted to say, hey, we need to restock the shelves a little bit. It's only $8 million. He's a somewhat redundant asset. We know we're getting Harris back. That $8 million is a really attractive number, especially because it's an expiring that you can sort of package it for lower level talent, because you may say like, hey, we need to get 2 players back here, right? For 1 or something like that, just because look, they're going to have some serious roster issues here next year. Like this is one thing that came out in the conversation we had yesterday. And we've been saying it. They just are, there's gonna be a lot of roster turnover here. A lot of these guys are not going to be coming back. Some are just too old. Some are just leaving on contracts. Some, they might be too expensive in Brown and Claxton. At that point, you are going to need to reset the deck a little bit in terms of what you can get back. Curry offers something of a chance. The thing with Curry, he's simultaneously the most attractive trade piece because he's cheap. Almost definitely you would need to take back almost 100% you have to take back worse shooting in the hope that you get something else, like a little more size, a little length, okay, passable shooting with the ability to guard multiple positions. Like I think that's what you need to kind of hope to get back, and probably like a little bit of a question mark / roll of the dice, because you're not going out and trading him for any young established talent 100%. You don't want to bring back long in the tooth other expiring contract that's overpaid. You can't, because it won't make the money work, because he doesn't make enough. He only makes $8 million. So you're going to be left in like this middle ground. And I think this Curry thing will actually show me where the Nets think they are. Like it's 100% what they do with Curry, because he is a tradable piece, a known commodity. There are no question marks. You know exactly what you're getting. He can do certain things really well. Can't do some other things really well. Not really because of any fault of his, just how big he is. I think this thing will define where the Nets see themselves on this timeline, because he's just and they might look at it too and say, it's only $8 million. He is much better than an $8 million player. Therefore, considering where we are in terms of salary cap and luxury tax, it's actually better to have him here because he's more talent than his $8 million implies. So I think, as with all questions like this, it comes down to what do you get back? Because that's the real thing. I do think though the Curry piece will define where the Nets think they are, where they think they are, what they think they need, and who they think is actually coming onto the roster. And I think in a little bit we'll talk about what that roster looks like and why this is another really weird spot that they're in. But I think this is my long way of saying you have to really seriously consider it. And I think that there's a chance they trade him and Nets fans look and say, what? Because it's not going to make total sense, because there's almost no world where they get someone back that's better than him in fans' eyes, but it might make sense more for like future stuff / getting someone a little cheaper that is just a different skill set.
Yeah, and the funny thing about it is, you talk about that $8 million. Obviously, it'd be better depending on those other players here. We've mentioned before that the decisions are going to have to get made around paying them. Well, freeing up Joe Harris's money, even for nothing in return, might be better than giving up Seth Curry. But even in the small movement of Seth Curry impacts what you do. The weird wrinkle too, not weird, but the interesting wrinkle is obviously the Ben Simmons factor, because if you introduce him, when you talk about Joe Harris versus Seth Curry, well, some of the bonus attributes when you talk about facilitator and someone that can help move the offense on that side of the floor, well, Ben Simmons, not remotely alike for like, but there is a skill set inside of him that the Nets have yet to be able to see for themselves on the court outside of some practices that could then change or at least reduce some of the value that you see on Seth Curry. So it does make that aspect of it fascinating. Can
I say one thing about that real quick? That this is another just sort of down chain effect of why it was so brutal that Ben Simmons couldn't play. For obvious reasons, it was so brutal because he just didn't play, and effectively made the team worse, because the idea is that he makes you better if he's playing with your team, right? So that's one thing. The other terrible side effect that we probably glossed over is you never even got a chance to see any of what it looked like. Right. Where we don't have anything to grasp onto here into what you can kind of believe in, right? So we saw, so think about the difference. Like last year was, 2 years ago, against the Bucks, it ended terribly, but you could hold on to this idea that, hey, when those 3 guys were on the court, it was legit, totally unstoppable. And now we just need to get them on the court. Obviously it doesn't happen, but at least you could hold on to that. Here, there's nothing to hold on to. It's like holding on to water. You don't have any idea what this looks like at all outside of whatever practice this guy might or might not have put in, because who even knows what he did outside, which isn't even a good judgment anyway. You don't even go into the offseason with anything to hold on to. Like, we just don't know. That's why this we should be just one big question mark from here to the end of from here through draft night and whatever. Because
I think you say to the end of time.
We all believe, that's what it feels like with the Nets sometimes. I think we all believe in our mind's eye we can see this perfect iteration of, crushing in transition, getting off, a lot of length on defense and makes up for the lack of size. And they're going to play super fast, and they can play like maybe this like 4.5 out, 4 out kind of style with Simmons as a roller. And like, he's going to, come up and be able to set screens and kind of destroy you in some of these mismatches. Yeah. Okay. That sounds great. We never saw it. And so going into this offseason is even worse than last year, because at least last year we thought, hey, when they all come back, they're just going to steamroll everybody. Now it's like, I think they will, but you can't trust it. And then to make moves based on that is even more impossible.
And that's why coming up here in a second, we're going to further extend into the Ben Simmons impact, not just to the choice around Seth Curry or Joe Harris, but other players on the roster that end up falling into this weird catacomb of can't make a one-to-one decision on a player like Seth Curry because there still remains so many unknowns, which is going to be interesting as we'll digest here when you look out at that free agency market a little bit. Before we do, 2 quick notes here, friends. First and foremost, you make the Locked On Nets podcast your first listen. Going to want to make that second listen, the Locked On NBA Big Board, with host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter. He's joined by Richard Stayman, Sam Ferris, and Liev Thulin as they are giving fans the in-depth look around the NBA draft, mock drafts, player rankings, and of course the big boards. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. And then betonline.net, my friends. They are the #1 source for all your betting and sports info. Walk over there right now. I just think about coming up on Saturday, Boston Celtics, Milwaukee Bucks. Yeah, maybe I'm going to take Milwaukee on the money line, -145. You know why? We lost to Boston. I just can't support it. You get over there on betonline.net. They're going to give you all those developments across the sports landscape, all the reviews and the news, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball that's on the run right now, and of course, Roses on the path to the Kentucky Derby, which will be back soon. BetOnline is continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting, playoffs, and esports and more. Head over to the website or use your mobile device and get in on the trends in action. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Continue this conversation here, Doug, so I don't get too long-winded around the then impact of Ben Simmons. Just to expand it here before we hit free agency. Bruce Brown. Right. That's another part of this, freeing up money to maybe reward Bruce Brown, the redundancy of what Ben Simmons could have been had we seen him on the court.
This is, again, I think, where we're going to get into why I think there's a chance, and this goes back to the Curry thing too. I think there's a chance we see something like, I don't think it's a high chance necessarily, but I think there's some chance that we see something like 50% roster turnover here. I don't think it's going to be that way, because I think in the end that they just say Bruce is worth more to us than he is to other places. He's a something of a hedge against Simmons, and even if it costs us a lot, we at least see. It's funny with Bruce, like, at least we know what that is. Yep. Right. Unlike the Simmons thing, at least I can look and see what it is. I understand what the positives and negatives are. This is the other reason
too. Sorry, just real quick. Arguably too. Remember, like, Bruce made 4.7, so $8 million from Seth Curry. Now you're talking about effectively 12 to 13 million on the books for Bruce. That wouldn't change what the bottom line is. So you could do that and not actually impact things when we talk about 18 versus 8 between Harris and Curry.
Yeah, look, they're going to be over the salary. They're going to be over the luxury tax no matter what. They're basically over it now. The luxury tax for next year is 149 to 150 million estimate. If Kyrie, even if he just opted into the player option and Patty Mills opted in, they'd be at 156. So they are already over. Every dollar spent now is like something like 3 to 1 in terms of cap hit. And so but they might just say, hey, that's what we need to do to retain Bruce Brown. But at least you know what you have. And so this, I think in the end, I'm going to probably default to don't trade Curry, or don't trade him now and see where you are at the trade deadline, because you would still probably get something back for him, like at that money, and you'll know where you are in the season rather than resetting it now. And I think, unless you're blown away by somebody, I think this is probably where I'm going to land with Curry, is that I don't want to trade him, because I think you just, at this point, with the way they're set up, have to just go into the season and cross their fingers with what they have and see what else they can just fill in around the margins. Because in the end, at $8 million, it can get you something back. It's not going to get you a superstar, obviously. And so at that point, I think you just need to roll the dice and hope that Simmons is great and that this looks like a super fast transition team. I don't know. I think that's where I'm going to land.
Yeah, you know what? Let's just stick on that. There's other factors here. We're going to talk about free agency coming up in the next couple of weeks and just how that impacts choices the Nets are going to make and some other decisions. They have some TPEs as well that they can utilize. But on that point, the only thing I think I'll push back on that would be the Brooklyn Nets have gone through so many iterations of parts in, parts out, learning on the fly, trying to adapt to one another, trying to get guys on the court. Now, you know what Seth Curry is. And to your point, maybe the best version is just it's Joe Harris and it's Seth Curry and it's firepower and we'll fill in things other ways. But the one thing I maybe don't like, although there could be proven commodities, is getting to the trade deadline next year and saying, now let's take Seth Curry out of here. And let's see how this new piece comes in and how it fits into what we're trying to do here. I do like the prospect of knowing what you have to some extent, as much as you possibly can, I guess, knowing what you have entering the season.
Okay, well, that makes the case more. I thought you were going to revert back. I thought you were going to talk yourself back into Curry in that, because I think that makes the case for not trading.
Well, no. I just mean so specifically on what you're saying about holding him or like holding him to the deadline or not. So it's an all or nothing.
I'll just back.
Either,
I understand what you're saying. I'm just going to back you back up a half a season and say, great. If we want continuity and consistency, then we don't trade these guys because these are the two guys we actually do know what we have with them, right? Like so, and so it's basically saying, do I want to have the inconsistency now or later? If you want the consistency, you don't trade them at all. You keep them and say, hey, at least I know what I have here.
And that's the difference of saying, I'll take the inconsistency early because then you assume it cleans itself up late. And I get your point. You're right? It's like saying this is why at some point we'll have a conversation around, should Brooklyn just have kept James Harden and lived with the results and seen how that played out? Because we saw some of the hiccups and the road bumps that were along the way there on the back end of this season. But yeah, I want, and this is personally from watching these last 3 years, it's like, I just want to know what it is. And then if you add a little piece at the deadline, and that could be any version of this. You're in the luxury tax and you live with this. Does Bruce Brown get to stay or go? All of these factors weigh on it. But the one thing I think I know for sure is that if you are going to make a choice around moving what feels like a redundancy, it's going to be Seth Curry. I think we both agree on that. Seth Curry is what you move for all the reasons we laid out here. Joe Harris is a guy you hope he gets healthy, gets back on the court, knocks down the perimeter shooting, gives you a little bit of size, and then you figure things out from there.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with that. I still want to see. I'm gonna asterisk my one comment by saying I just need to see, because there's like a move they can make here where and I'll be honest, wait till we get to the free agent episodes.
Yeah, this isn't the end all be all that we're having.
The free agent. Well, it's funny because the free agent class this year is horrible. It is so bad. It's so bad. It's like it's just chock full of old guys or just like sort of retreads. There's no most stars have already been locked up at this point. So that's not like the Nets were going to be in position for that anyway. But like even like these middle tier guys, like there's huge question marks around them. This is a very, very poor free agent class. And at the same time, this is just a tease for other episodes. There's like some weird world where, and it's not going to happen because they're going to sign Kyrie. Something like 5 or 8 guys from this year's team are back for next year's team. Kevin Durant, Simmons, who, by the way, huge question mark. Harris, you hope the ankle's okay. Seth, hopefully they don't trade him. Patty Mills player option probably picks it up. Kyrie, and then it's the young guys, Cam, Day'Ron, and Kessler. Like
Goran Dragic.
I don't think he comes back.
No, yeah, it's like that. That's like one of the
like guys you could see walking. Bruce because of money. Aldridge retires. Blake could retire. Drummond's just going to go get money from somewhere else. I don't think they're going to bring him back. Claxton could get too much money. Dragic could just be out. Like David Duke Jr., whatever.
Right
yeah. That's just a huge number. There's just a very good chance that we're looking again for another year at a almost completely different Nets team going into the season. And by the way, it's going to be a completely different Nets team going into the season anyway, because we didn't get Ben Simmons. The money was there, but you never saw what it looked like. So this is just crazy, man. This is why the offseason is going to be super interesting. There's like so many ways to slice this because the Nets are just at such an inflection point right now, even though it doesn't feel like it because they have Kevin Durant, but they are at a very, very weird point here, especially the way they're constructed, watching some of these other teams in the playoffs that are going to kind of be their iterations for maybe a little while. which is another scary thing for the Nets.
It is an off-season onion, man. The layers for the Brooklyn Nets and what could happen here.
What do you mean an onion?
It's like an ogre. Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. I mean, that smells stinky. It's neither here nor there. Doug gets it. He's in the weeds with me. And this is why it makes it fun, man. Like, these actually are, I really enjoy these conversations because you can walk down the path of, if X, then what does Y and Z look like, and what really results in the best possible version of the team? Something that all we've ever been able to do for the last 3 years is go, maybe it's the best version, and then that could still be where we are as we work our way through a great offseason.
All right. Yeah, we got a ton of, like I said, ton of stuff from the offseason coming up. We'll start banging into that next week. We'll actually we'll take a look at some of these playoffs too and what that means for the Nets. Because I think what's going to happen over these next few games, especially in the Eastern Conference, is going to define how worried the Nets need to be sort of going forward. I think there's already major concerns based on just what you've seen from Milwaukee and what you've seen from Boston, and based on who's doing it. I think that the Nets have to look at this landscape and say, we're in a tough, we already knew the Eastern Conference was tough, but now we're looking at, I think it's arguably looks even tougher because of Boston. So anyway, we'll get into that later on next week as well. In the meantime, make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. And also subscribe to the Locked On Nets YouTube. Trying to get to 3,000 subscribers. We're going to get there. I think we're going to get there this offseason. So be part of that. Go and like and subscribe over on YouTube.
Hey, make sure you make your second listen after the Locked On Nets podcast, the Locked On NBA podcast, because, of course, they're covering all that great NBA action for all 30 teams or the ones that are still in it. So that's a great way to get your dose of NBA basketball coverage. And let me just say, friends, big decisions to make. Well, guess what? I thought we'd get to see forever, but forever's gone away. It's so hard to say goodbye to yesterday. Boys to men.
Also, the gang from Patty's. They do a really good rendition of that one as well. We'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.